Welcome to episode 22 of Site Chat. In this episode, we talk about gender neutral leadership. We look at research on gender differences and question whether our stereotype and biases are actually impacting the way we look at how leaders are made. Should gender be an issue, or should we just look at an individual's capabilities and abilities? I hope you enjoyed this episode. And as usual, if you have any comments or suggestions, please send to sitechat@omnisite.com or tweet to site_chat. Hi there, my name is Dr. Austin Tay and you are listening to Site Chat. This podcast is brought to you by OmniSite Consulting. This podcast discusses issues related to the workplace, and together with my co-host, James Molly-Kirk, we provide our viewpoints and advice on how to navigate in the ever-changing workplace. If this is your first time listening to us, welcome. If you are our regular listeners, welcome too. If you have not subscribed to this podcast, please do so at all reputable podcast platforms. Just to also mention that Site Chat is now on Verbal. You can download this episode and also previous episodes. We'd like to hear also from you. If there are particular topics that you would like us to discuss on this podcast or would like to provide comments and suggestions, do get in touch. You can reach us either by email, sitechat@omnisite.com, or via Twitter to site_chat. Right, now we get all this out of the way, we can start our podcast. James, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Austin. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Thank you again for joining me in this podcast. Now, today we are going to be talking about leadership. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the need to have gender neutral leadership. Right? So, James, what does leadership mean to you?
Good question, and certainly a good thing to explore today in terms of the ongoing focus on releasing the potential of half of humanity in the workplace or in governance. So female leaders is definitely a topic that we talk about quite a lot these days, and there's quite a lot that is a bit perhaps beyond what the research can support in terms of female leadership, what it is. What is leadership? Obviously many definitions, so the simple stuff for me, it's motivating people to do a task that has some sort of purpose. Ideally, so it's that setting the direction, motivating, executing. That's fundamentally it. It's an influence process.
Yeah.
To get things done. Typically, of course, leadership is framed from the way that humans have seen the impact of leadership the most, which is war. And through war, and especially if we're talking just of modern society, the influence of World War II was huge on the development of leadership studies, industrial managerial sort of leadership stuff, and industrial managerial leadership styles were based upon military models.
Yep.
And those are, of course, primarily based on male models of leadership. So all the icons, all the anecdotes, all the studies were fundamentally around males. And it's a male-dominated society, as it has been for millennia. It's only recently, really, we're seeing females breaking through, finally, into leadership positions across the world, in all areas, whether it's military, governance, NGOs, or businesses on their own 2 feet. And there's many examples of those. we talked about. And so hence this question of female leadership.
Yeah.
Is it different to male leadership? Is it even better?
It's important to know that we are now recognizing female as leaders in different capacity, as you just mentioned. If I may, I'm going to kind of quote something that Manfred Katz-de-Vries, who is the clinical professor of leadership development and organizational change at INSEAD. He wrote a piece about leadership in organization in 1998. I know this is very, very old, but I think it is still quite relevant. Now, he said there are some theories that kind of purports two extreme position. Leadership can be identified as someone's personality. So researchers will be arguing about a particular personality, or very situational based. So based on how people are influenced by the individual differences and attribute the variation of leadership effectiveness to the environment that they are in. So he further classified this two leadership into what is a property and a process. I'm going to just explain his classification here. Now, under the property itself, he came up with 4 different theories. One would be trait theory that both James and myself are quite familiar with, personality. Leadership is viewed as a set of relatively stable and enduring personal traits or physical properties, specific personality characteristics distinguish effective from ineffective leaders. Then the second one is behavioral theory. So this is where we talk about technical actions of a leader and the human actions. What are the observable role behaviors of the leader? Then we have the contingency theory. So it's the emergence of one leadership style that is contingent to the environment in which the leader is operating. So in other words, the most effective leader is able to adapt his or her actions dependent on the situation he or she faces. Yeah, so very task or relation-oriented leaders. And fourth is attribution theory. So leadership is not a viable scientific construct, but a label that is given to a behavior. So that is to say that leadership is like a perceptual issue here. In terms of process, he is saying that leadership can be considered as a charismatic process. So it's viewed as a very interactive process between the leader, the followers, and the situation. The second process he came up with was inspirational process. And this is something that we are quite familiar with, transactional and transformational leadership. Yeah. Basing on what Manfred has delineated, the categorization, in my view, it seems to have a kind of masculine undertone. Do you think that's the reason why we are seeing few female leaders in organizations?
I think the reason why historically there have been fewer female leaders is simply the socio-cultural attitudes and expectations on female roles in society.
Right.
And that what that leads to in terms of opportunities and expectations, it's just suppressed the opportunities and undervalued the contribution. As simple as that. I think today's examples of female leaders are varied. They're as varied in their leadership style as they are in their impact. From Angela Merkel to Jacinda Ardern, from Kamala Harris to Theresa May, these are just political ones. We've now got the head of the World Bank. We've now got the head of the EU Commission. And female leaders are incredibly talented. The question really anymore is just, why is there a question about gender at all, given that now the opportunities are there, and whether it's in the military or in business or in governance, females can, it's almost awful saying that, females are capable of doing this. Of course they are, and they've demonstrated it. But the question's more is that I think it goes from this idea that, still going back to that point you were making, is there a difference between female and male leadership? That's, I think, is the bigger question, the more interesting question, rather than can females lead? Well, of course they can. Elizabeth I, kicked ass in her generation.
For sure, yes.
So it's not a problem there's not a question about that. It's all about opportunity. So putting that aside now, opportunity is coming. Is there a difference? Is there a difference in style or approach? And if there is, it'll be based on from your approach there on trait. So the first question is, are males and females different in their personalities? Well, research, the classic papers back in 2001 from Costa, McCrae and so on, or their general folks. Actually, I've got the quote here. Where it was, it's Costa et al. 2001. They found that gender differences are modest in magnitude, consistent with gender stereotypes, and replicable across cultures. It's that there are modest differences between genders in the Big Five and sub factors, and they're consistent with gender stereotypes. Females are more agreeable, more warm, open to feelings, and men are more assertive and open to ideas. It's in line with those sorts of approaches. But there's other research that actually says, and a recent one by others would agree that there's even smaller differences. Actually, Vianello in 2013, they looked at implicit measures of personality and found even smaller differences using implicit measures. So we can take out cultural or conscious stereotypes. You get even less differences when you're measuring personality. And yet, another Italian researcher, more recent, I think, it was 2012 actually, called Giudice, found much larger differences when they did a different approach to a study. So overall, the question on trait, is there trait differences between males and females? Probably, again, it's not enough for us to use trait as an excuse or as a key factor to explain away or to forecast differences in female leader behavior, even though the stereotype of females being more compassionate, better communicators, and males being more assertive, action-orientated, still abound. So is there a trait difference? There's a question mark there. And
right.
Individual differences are probably far, far more greater. Again, pick any leader you want, female leader you want, pick two leaders and they'll be more different than they are similar.
Yes.
Their gender is not going to say, oh, they're the same. Look, they're female leaders, you can tell. No. Put 10 female leaders and analyze them, and there'll be a huge range of trait differences that lead to then behavioral differences and competency differences. But somehow they're delivering results, just as males would do.
Right.
You put 10 male leaders from CEOs into and analyze them, and you'll have more differences than similarities. So I think the trait question can be put aside. The situational one is interesting. Are females potentially more flexible than males? Again, if we're down to trait, if that's trait-based, there's no reason to assume that it's a gender is the big reason. Individual differences will be more likely to predict that than gender. So if the differences that we see are socially constructed still, then, and even when we are appraising female leaders. So the interesting study you talked about from Zenger, he did a couple, that female leaders are performing better in crises. That's really interesting. And it's a good study, actually. It's based on 360-degree feedback.
Yes.
And it was on 60,000 leaders.
Yep.
Incredible stuff. And they were doing better than on 13 out of 19 competencies.
Yes.
So it's a huge level study saying that female leaders are actually been rated as more effective. Well, that's fantastic.
Yep.
That's really fantastic. And their earlier study demonstrated the same, that on every competency, female, that's taking initiative to innovation, to collaboration, driving for results, female leaders were rated higher than male. That's fantastic. So it's not even, you can't say that this is trait-based, because that would be, they should only be better on the interpersonal stuff, the collaborative things. But that's not what these studies are showing. They're showing that women overall, on average, again, average is always a tricky thing to deal with when we come down to individual leaders, but on average, they beat males. Of course, this is in America, all American centric, but they're beating males across every competency, except for developing strategic perspective, in fact. And that's incredible.
Yeah.
That's
and
incredible.
I think you're right to say that, as you said, a lot of research is showing that female could also be demonstrating all those competencies. So I also want to be very clear, and I want to also be careful here. Reading research like this is not saying that, there you go, this is the evidence, female are better leaders than men. I think this is again where the stereotype comes in, as we were talking about earlier on. When the society stopped thinking about men and women, their ability to do certain thing, it makes it easier when we start talking about leaders in general, where this is the whole point of our conversation today, gender neutral leadership. In itself, because we are classifying leaders based on very biased assessment, as we were talking about, in terms of talent management initiative, how are we creating fairness for both gender? We often take women as a lesser gender than men, and that itself has created a problem and stereotype. And that is why when we are looking at whether women can be leaders or better leaders, we always think that, no, they are not, because we think that men are better based on what we understand, what we learn historically, what we kind of have a kind of bias towards that. And I think for organization, perhaps as in terms of assessing leaders in general, put aside the gender label. Rather, instead, look at the capabilities, the ability of that individual, how they could function as a leader. Those will be more important than whether the person is female or male, because we have established a lot of this capabilities and the way individual can lead is both sides. It's not just one predominant side in terms of gender. When we are able to remove a gender connotation, it makes it easier for us to look at a person, an individual, as a good leader, leading the team, leading the organization to the goals that they want to achieve. And I think that would be a much easier conversation to have in organization today or in the future, because we are still struggling a lot in organization. Because when we are talking about the C-suites, we still have a lot of men on board, right? We don't have the female. And I think this is where it becomes a little bit more political, because we are talking about gender itself. To me, leadership itself should be equal opportunity, regardless of your gender itself. And I think that creates a better conversation when we talk about leadership. We don't have to be blaming someone for incompetency. They're not incompetent in doing something because of the gender. I think gender should not be a equalizer here at all. We should be looking at individuals for their capabilities, their ability to lead, rather than their gender. So for me, there's still a lot of conversation needs to be done with teaching organization to understand that. But we can be arguing about this. The reality is, I'm still seeing a lot of organization still treat women as the lesser kind of gender, or not as great as men to be leader. How can we actually perhaps change their mind for organization? What kind of conversation should we have with them to let them start thinking about, leadership should be gender neutral?
Yeah, it's really good points, Austin. The big challenge about this, and that involves the challenge that the research tries to get to, is that if there are no real trait-based differences, then why do we still see differences? And are we seeing differences that are real, or still part of this underlying bias, or a response to the stereotype, a reaction to it? So I look at these some articles that very typical. If you Google for female leadership, there are big claims now. It's disappointing that women leaders, are more transformational. They, like I said before, they promote cooperation. And some of these articles are really very clear that women leaders are different and better. And yet I've not seen the research other than what we're seeing that women actually, in these large US examples, women leaders are excellent across all competencies. They don't have a particular style. So to attribute women with a particular style of leadership is actually then potentially going to hamper them when they require flexibility. They apply that situational, more contingent approach to leadership. So to say that women should be transformational would not be a help for women, because that's not all leadership needs. Transformational leadership is beneficial in certain situations and not in others. So to start to cast a female style of leadership, I don't think is helpful, and it's almost falling into the trap of stereotype.
Stereotype again, yeah.
That's not what women need. Women need to be evaluated fairly and equally in whatever domain they're endeavoring, whether that's leadership or a technical field or whatever it is. So the key point here is that the idea of how we evaluate traits, how we evaluate behavior, how we define leadership and evaluate leadership, describe it, is, unfortunately, we're wrapped up still in these inherent biases of how we see them. I think I described to you the study in the US Army of how a large data set of people were looked at over about 80,000 performance reviews. Did I mention this? Yeah.
Yep.
And that males, on objective criteria performance, the males and females had no difference across different criteria. But subjectively, the descriptions used in the performance reviews, because they often will have to write a descriptive part, will use gender stereotypical terms for positive approval or for negative, for disapproval. Quite extraordinary. So even to evaluate males and females by males or females, would female evaluators fall into the same trap of calling, giving negative terms to females in a certain way, that they're more emotional, that male are more analytical, that these adjectives are subjective and are stuck in stereotypes. So how do we get to a more neutral environment? How do organizations do it? We can just evaluate people individually in terms of their leadership capabilities and potential, rather than through the prism of these implicit gender stereotypes. It's very important, I think, we start to stop reinforcing in-group, out-group processes. And everything from talent management systems to understanding the barriers, to getting rid of the barriers in your talent systems ahead of female potential leaders, for opportunities, for training, for career paths. Remove those things so that you are providing that level playing field that so many companies have tried to set up these days, and many have been so successful already. And wherever you can, resist stereotypes that appear to advantage any in-group, whether that's male or female, men or women, because stereotypes that even appear to benefit women, women have a more transformational leadership style, I believe, are not beneficial to the cause. They'll only create a reactive approach from a male point of view, and that's not what we want.
No. I mean, the last thing we want is to pigeonhole them in a particular classification here, that they are not able to do other things.
That's been the evolutionary problem we've had to deal with for thousands of years. We've got to break that.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's important to also stress a little bit more here, because whatever we have been sharing is very American centric. We haven't yet to find anything that's actually quite based on Asian perspective here. If you as the listeners, if you have any research that you think would be beneficial for us to discuss with regards to this, it would be great. And of course, both of us being in Asia, we already see there's a cultural difference here, historically, again, and then the culture itself, women leaders are few to mention in this part of the world, but that they are not typical of what you just said, of certain categories or certain personality or leadership style. They are quite varied, and very, very much we have to understand that leadership itself can kind of derive from the context they are in, how they will behave. So it's regardless of your gender. If the situation requires you to behave in certain ways, if that particular individual could step up as a leader, then good for them. That's what should be. And it's not always very clear also how we could help to identify leaders in terms of a male or female. But as more and more research is coming out, it's good to be very aware of what they are looking at. And as what James was saying, not a lot of research that are focusing on female leaders itself can also be quite skewed to a certain population and certain result they want to achieve. When you read articles like this or research like this, look at the context. Is it applicable to the situation that you want to apply to, especially for organization? When you're trying to convince the organization, hey, research itself is showing that we need to be giving more equal opportunities to both men and women. And I think this is where HR, talent development people, or even CEOs need to be very mindful when you want to create a environment of inclusivity and diverse workforce. We need to also look at things like that. How can we create fairness within organization? Give everybody a chance to develop as a leader rather than curtailed by their own gender itself. And stop being biased and having your own inherent bias or stereotypical way of labeling leaders as what we think they should be. Let them flourish, explore their strengths and their capabilities to bring to the table for the organization, how they could help the organization to grow. And I think that is more important than whether they are a male or female potential leader or leader itself. So I think this is very important with this conversation that we were having here. And yeah, any other points that, James, you want to add on for our listeners with regards to this?
Thanks. While you're saying that, I was trying to see this in context over time.
Yep.
That the discussion, the interest, and the real impact of women in leadership is very short term. I mean, it's really happening in the last, what, we're talking about decade?
Yeah.
Longer than that?
Yeah.
I mean, the emergence of women as senior leaders of big communities, again, business or governments, has really been a recent phenomenon, and wonderful, lucky for us. But what we've demonstrated today, I think, in the research that we've looked at, just in the run-up to the podcast, is that really that women are still battling. The playing field is not level for women to get access to leadership roles, whether that's in the education and doors that can be opened even to get them to the position, to the starting block, let alone the opportunities within organizations beyond that. So it's not a level playing field yet, but women are starting to occupy far more leadership roles. I mean, just an example, I'm just looking at some numbers. In the US Army, 23% of junior officers are now female. 23%. And yet senior leaders, generals, it's 8%. So that's a historical timeline in front of you. Generals are several generations afterwards. But so when we're looking at doing research now on female leadership, it's really very limited. We're looking at the trailblazers. We're looking at small cohorts, and we're trying to understand, is there a difference? Now, look, women leaders are here. Look, is there a difference? Are they a new species? Is there something? What have we missed here? What's the magic? And as we've demonstrated, that these cohorts are limited. They're US-centric. they just the very evaluation, the definition of leadership, evaluation of leadership is completely biased at an unconscious level in these gender paradigms that we've held as humans for generations, evolutionary driven. And it's very hard to push out. And when we're looking at research, just for example, I was thinking of, because we talked a lot about dark side personality and derailers. Well, the research on counterproductive behaviors in organizations is typically on males. Some of that is because the majority of white collar crime is by males. And that's because most males historically have been the leaders in positions
Yes.
to conduct white collar crime.
Yes.
So we don't even know yet really about the tendency of female leaders in those positions to commit white collar crime and related problematic behaviors that leaders often get caught in doing. Same with, so we need to be looking here. I think we've got years to wait while we start to get better data and that can allow us to take a more objective view of women or female leadership. Because then we can look at much broader things. You can, as you say, we can look at more cultures, more nations, longitudinal studies. We can try to get, start to break down these
barriers that we have.
And we can look at broader fields of leadership, including counterproductive behaviors and bullying. And so there'll be examples already out there where females are dominating the leadership positions, and the hospital, medical health is probably a big area to think about. What's leadership telling us? Leadership studies tell us in where females tend to be the dominant leadership group in terms of genders. We look at that way and get some perspective, rather than looking at organizations where females tend to be the minority in leadership positions. So I think there's so much more research to be done, and the real view of this won't be clear for another couple of decades, I think. And what we need to resist are, one, like you're saying, we need to break the idea of looking at this from stereotypical lens, because that's not helpful.
That's helpful indeed,
And we have to, the whole inclusivity, non-biased movement in organizations applies. All those ways to try and see everybody as gender, ethical, ethnicity, whatever, neutral is important. All those things apply here. And to avoid trying to pigeonhole, women as just seeing a book here, The New Advantage about women leaders. It's just, I think it's a red herring. It's too early, and it's not really going to help what we need to do, which is to balance out, make inclusive our workforce and opportunities in life. Whatever your age, gender, or sexual orientation. That's what we're looking for. And the time is needed from the psychological point of view, so we can get better research.
For sure. I mean, it is important to have more research to talk a little bit more about this area of leadership. I think we have to be clear that leadership should not transcend gender. It should be about capabilities. Everybody should have equal opportunities to prove their worth for an organization, and for organizations to thrive in this era, I think, which is so challenging already. We need to bring down all these barriers and stereotype, and view people or individuals as someone who is capable to do the job, and not what they are in terms of their gender. I think this is a kind of very interesting topic. I hope people will not get too upset when we're talking about gender, as it is always a very sticky topic to talk about. We are not against. Sorry.
Sorry. Just in that point, obviously I've got some. We both know some very good coaches, facilitators, and leaders who are female and who lead and have organized, women-centered leadership groups. Female entrepreneurs, women leadership forums. This is right. They need to do this because women have been disadvantaged. It's about building up competence to overcome these generational stereotypes. That's not what we're saying. That is part of the inclusivity movement, and it requires again, identity for some in-groupism, that's okay.
Yeah.
If that builds strength and builds networks and helps propel people, because the world is still not balanced. It's still not fair.
Yeah.
What we're talking about really is from the psychological point of view, the research, the concept of leadership is actually asexual, although it's military and masculine in its origins. That's from an evolutionary point of view.
Yep.
And that personality traits do not suggest anything will be different in terms of competencies, behavioral competencies, or adaptability for contingencies. There's nothing that would suggest at this point that females would be advantaged or disadvantaged. Any single female would have the flexibility and opportunity to lead if she has those right traits. Her gender would not stop her from being a leader.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Very, very important to stress that we are not saying anything adverse here, but I think we welcome that kind of conversation. If you as a listener disagree, please let us know. I know we would love to have this conversation. And when we decided to do this topic itself, we were quite petrified because both of us are men, and to talk about gender neutral and talk about female leadership, are we capable of doing that? I think we have. I hope we have actually in this podcast itself present a very objective and fair assessment of what we have read, and then hopefully that more conversation can be made with regards to this particular area of leadership. And as usual, with that, which is very, very hard going kind of a conversation, as something that we like to do, to discuss things that are quite difficult to address, we have to come to an end of this podcast as usual. It has always been fun having conversation with you, James, where we kind of have this kind of discussion, and definitely we will be looking forward to the next one, where we will probably discuss another topic that perhaps a bit more controversial. I don't know. Let's think about it and keep our listeners speculating what's the next topic going to be. So thank you very much for taking the time, and we definitely will be talking very soon. And to all the listeners, thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.